And when we get to the end of the day, and we are running low on energy, focusing in on some of those key points that we heard coming through your discussions was really important, and we have captured those other thoughts as well in Slido, and we can continue the conversation outside, and for those of you coming tomorrow can continue them at the workshop as well. So just to wrap up and provide some reflections back to you on what we've heard, and hopefully sum up a few of the things that we've learnt today. Joining me are Matt Linnegar from the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation, Alex Gartmann, our chair, who you've met earlier, and Annabel Johnson, the CEO of New South Wales Farmers Association. So, Annabel, you've not had a chance to have a microphone yet today, so I'll start off with you. What are your key thoughts from today, and what do you take away from this?
I think I mean, I've been invited up to speak because New South Wales farmers were the genesis behind AFI, and in preparation for this, I got the team to dig up all the old documents from 20 years ago, and I found the old business case for AFI, which was really interesting because it highlighted a lot of the things that we've discussed here today. So the problem that we have in agriculture is we're a declining part of the economy. There's less connection with people, voters, and that isn't a trend that's going to change. That's something that we need to grapple with. And the solution that New South Wales farmers had 20 years ago was to develop AFI as an independent, fact-based, science-based, to come up with solutions to problems. And I think that's really what we've been discussing here, that they're the issues that we're still dealing with, and the relevance of AFI still exists in making sure that there is a forum to have that science-based, that fact-based, and come up with good, robust policy to the key issues that are impacting farmers. So that's sort of the first thing that I'd say out of today, that I think that the importance of AFI and good policy exists now, probably more, and it's a more compelling reason than it was 20 years ago. I think the other thing that I've really taken out of today is how difficult it is to collaborate in agriculture. We're not good at collaborating with each other at the best of times, and the fact that there were 3 tables discussing agricultural advocacy highlights that that's an area of improvement. But the comments from Katie yourself around the need to collaborate with, and the synergies with First Nations people, the comments from Robin around health, that we don't collaborate in those spaces, it just continues to highlight that the way that we can frame up our solutions that are going to be more appealing to decision makers, to the broader public, but we're not taking those opportunities as agriculture. Because as the great debate said, we just talk to ourselves, and we're very comfortable doing that. As an industry, we're not comfortable with having the uncomfortable conversations. So that'd be my 2 key learnings from today.
Alex?
Oh, where to start? I think for me, I've reflected, are we talking about the same issues that we've talked about for the last 20 years? And is that because they're wicked problems, and they're actually, we need to have a more sophisticated approach to getting to the simple side of a really complex challenge, which takes time. I wasn't around 20 years ago, so I don't know whether or not the conversations we're having are the same. Because if it's a really wicked problem, then it's not going to go away in reality. It will. What we need to be doing is assessing whether or not we're having the same conversations with the same people and getting the same outcome. But if it's a really wicked problem, and climate change is not something that we can solve and it's done and we put it behind us, as an example, are we having more sophisticated conversations, more informed conversations, and incrementally shifting the maturity of how we're dealing with something? And it might not be that we're solving it, but are we reducing our risk? Are we mitigating the potential impacts from that challenge? And if I reflect on the private sector, we spend most board meetings in the private sector talking about risk management, governance, and we think about risk frameworks, and we all agree around the board table, you can't get rid of risk, but we can mitigate risk, and we can put in actions that reduce the ramifications of that risk. And I wonder whether or not, on the issues that the Australian agricultural community is talking about, if those issues, if we're sort of dealing with the little issues, question mark, the big ones, are we having different conversations? Are we actually reducing our exposure of risk? Are we improving the mitigation strategies? Are we shifting the dial on the consequences if that risk comes to the fore, rather than a wicked problem that we think we can solve? So that's one of the reflections I have about, well, how do we assess whether or not, and I was interested in the business case for AFI 20 years ago, did we meet our KPIs? Really keen to have a look at that. But are we shifting the dial, and what should we be looking at for the next 20 years if we think some of those big, chunky, hairy, wicked problems will actually still exist? What sort of conversation, and how will we shift the risk exposure for us? So that was...
Okay, and so thinking about what we can learn from good governance too, are there processes that we could easily put in place to say, well, let's evaluate how these things are going. Let's give ourselves a point in time, whether it be every 6 months or every 3 years, but a point in time where we say, we've been working on this for a while, how are we tracking? Are there models that we can use for that?
Look, if we ask our academic research community, yes, there'll be a model that we can use for that. And if we ask the community, the business community, there will be a model that we can make use of. Could we get agreements across the agricultural community to use the one model? Not sure.
All right, over to our token male on the panel today, who might have been around agriculture for around 20 years-ish, thereabouts. What are your reflections on the day, Matt?
Yeah, thanks. And unfortunately, I have been around for 20 years, even longer. And so, for those of you in the room, I won't point you out, who've been around as long as I have or longer. Are the issues more or less the same as what we were talking about 20 years? More or less they are, yeah. So, do different things emerge over time? Yes, they do. However, I would say, and it's not in agriculture alone, we're not the only one afflicted by this, I would say there's a lot more interest in identifying, dissecting and pointing out the problem or the issue than there is in the effort that goes into what we do about it from there. The other thing I'd say, and I've heard that today, is some wanted action, some wanted more talk. I know we're having a bit of a laugh about that before. But a couple of things, just hearing some of the conversations around here today. So one is we've got an affliction to move to solution mode as quickly as we possibly can. And if we don't sit long enough in the discomfort and in the disagreement and in the things that separate us and move to solution, then generally what happens is somebody bowls over the top of somebody else to get to where they need to be. So my reflection is we're spending a lot of time on what the issues are and how we can pour as many resources as we can into solving those issues. And we've spent almost no time in understanding the bits that grease the wheels to get you there. So what are the processes we need to undertake? What are the relationships we need to establish and maintain to get there? These are all the things that grease the wheels that get you there. And yet I would say in agriculture we spend almost no time on identifying or making progress on those. We're also solution focused when making progress sometimes is enough. So some things we're also fixated sometimes on seeing a problem, and it might be a really adaptive challenge that we need to face, and we're trying to clobber it with a technical fix. And that's not always going to get us there. So there's some of the things that my reflections, just hearing what's going on around the table. You were talking about collaboration, and that's something that rolls off the tongue really easily for all of us. But to be honest, folks, we do it bugger all of the time. If we get to cooperation, we're doing pretty well most of the time. So collaboration takes time, effort, building relationships, and it's actually about more than two parties coming together to create something more or new than was there before, not just each coming away with something. So that's okay. Sometimes cooperation's enough, folks. But that's what I mean. Spend time at the beginning. Where are we trying to get to here with this thing? Is it a technical or adaptive challenge? You know, we need to spend more time up front there to save time as we go through and focus on the right things. So there's some reflections from that today.
And when you say to focusing on the right things, the right processes, I think we heard from a few different angles today that we don't focus much at the moment on agriculture in capacity building, in building people's personal, individual capacity to respond to problems, as well as that relational trust that is needed to advance on things. Anybody want to offer some insights there on how we could advance that capacity building, or if that should be a shift in focus, or is it something we should just assume will come as we continue to focus on the larger big picture issues?
Yeah, look, I think we do invest in capacity building through many different ways. I think the challenge ahead of us, and we're certainly doing some of this and others are looking at it as well, it's taking all of that investment and how we move from the individual to the collective capacity, because this is where we're heading to. If we're going to make progress on the sorts of things we've identified, moving the dial on collective capacity and the way in which people interact with each other to get there is an investment that needs to be made. So I think that's where the more investment needs to be. It's easy for me to say in my line of work, keep investing in the individual, but in the end, leadership is a collective act, not an individual one anyway.
I'm struck in the debate. Sorry, Alex, do you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to be a little bit provocative about around the capacity piece, and I wonder, we often look at the people in the room and in our own networks and think, who needs to be developed. We'll invest in their capacity because we think they need strengthening in X, Y, or Z. And I wonder if because most of us are a pretty well networked group with ourselves, and so when you start to look around and think, what development do people need? What's the capacity building? We're kind of talking to the same echo chamber all the time, and we've mentioned that a few times today. So how might that question shift if we thought about how do we build capacity by engaging and being inspired by other sectors? Now, a couple of times today we talked about ag being the best in the world. Are we the best sector in the world, or is it just Australian agriculture in the agriculture space? And I think that to build capacity, we actually, if we're only looking at the same pool, we're seeing the capacity that exists, and that's what we're role modelling to, rather than being inspired by new sectors, new spaces, new people to be stretched further. Because I wonder if our ambitions around capacity are constrained because we're only looking at ourselves.
Something that struck me from the debate, which I very much enjoyed, thank you debaters, Justin used the phrase subconscious obstruction. And that really got me thinking about the ways that we often bring our own biases and frames of reference to problems. And a couple of other people around different discussions were talking about taking a sociological approach to some of these and unpacking things from a behavioural point of view, which I briefly touched on this morning as well. Annabel, how would your members react if you said we're going to undertake some sociological cultural training for our membership? Who wants in? What would happen?
It'd be new. It'd certainly be a new approach to work through. But I think if you actually, like from our members and farmers in general, they want outcomes. So they want organisations, individuals involved that are going to produce outcomes. So I'm sure there'd be many questions around, well, what is the value of this? How is this going to enhance? But that doesn't mean, as long as the leaders of organisations can create a narrative and highlight how this is going to move agriculture and your business forward, these are the types of conversations and leadership that we need to be looking at and working through.
Something else that John Ralph mentioned a couple of times too is focusing on the important over the urgent. We all get really busy all the time. What can people in this room do to change their frame of mind from, well, I know that sounds like a great thing to do, but I am actually genuinely busy and I have a lot of urgent things I've got to approach. Any advice that we can take collectively to reframe that problem that we all deal with on a daily basis?
I'll tackle that first. Because Katie, you know, I have a lot of things that get put on your list so that you're really busy. So maybe we need to have a one-on-one about how we reframe that. But I was talking to a couple of people today about the what-if scenarios. A few times there's been a conversation around, do we need a burning platform? How do we actually move from talk to action? How do we implement, you know, things that are complex, challenging, questioning whether we have capacity, and you're talking about the capability and the capacity. And if we were to reframe it around spending our time on the important scenarios to model, so that when the shit does hit the fan at some point on different issues and topics, that we actually have a bit of a playbook in a way as to how we might respond. And I think that's where I think the intellectual input into AFI in thinking about scenarios for the future, what could happen with a change of government, change of policy for X, Y or Z, what are the ramifications? And we start to put that mid-term horizon, because we all spend time in the really busyness now or setting targets for 2050, but nothing in between. So some of the strategies that might help us think about 5-10 year horizons. Now, it's not answering how you do it as an individual. I'm not sure I've got those skills here, but I think that building up some experience of working through scenarios and having the evidence from an AFI research perspective with the networks, with the leadership, then we're actually, you know, it's an enjoyable experience to do, because you're not actually in a crisis, you're not actually having to respond yet, so the blinkers are off. And when things are enjoyable and you're leveraging off skills, you actually put more time into it, or you prioritise it because it's a bit more fun, even if the busy, urgent things are taking over your diary over the important.
Annabel, you lead an organisation where urgent things come onto your desk every single day, but everybody also thinks their issue is the most urgent that they've ever presented to you. How do you manage that?
It's a challenge, and it actually came up in the business case, which was one of the reasons that one of the strengths of New South Wales farmers is we're very good at dealing with short-term issues that are impacting our members and finding solutions to those. So that does mean that we do have a short term. We're dealing with issues that our members are bringing up that are impacting them on their farm that day. They want a solution. So the business case has highlighted that's one of our strengths. You could also see it as a weakness, which every strength is. It's also a weakness. So they had the foresight to go, well, AFI is an organisation that can look at some of those medium to longer term solutions, so that an organisation not being across everything, because it's very difficult to be across everything, but how I think it's sort of good to see agriculture as a bit of an ecosystem. How in the ecosystem do we ensure that we have the organisations, the capacity and people understanding where each other play, that we do have all of those areas covered. So while we're dealing with the short-term immediate things that are impacting farms, Katie, you're not dealing with that on a daily basis. You're looking at the medium to long-term issues that you know are going to come up.
And I think we've talked a little bit about networking and how it's important to keep those collaborations and cooperations going as well. I can't emphasise enough how important, from AFI's point of view and also mine personally, it is to maintain those diverse networks, because the things you learn from the unexpected conversations, and it might just be a half-hour coffee catch-up, or it might be a 3-hour committee meeting that you sat through, it might be a really interesting conference that you went to, keeping those networks alive, you can learn so much. We all heard it, Maz. We all heard you drop that. Keeping those networks alive and learning from them and cultivating them is vital to make sure that we are keeping a broad view, we at AFI, but also we personally, are keeping a view on what's happening around us, because it is easy to get drawn into that bubble. Final thoughts from the panel. We've been looking back, we are looking forward. What do you think the next 20 years holds for agriculture and for ag policy in particular? Matt.
Pretty much the same as 20 years ago, I'd say. Will some of the same things come up in 20 years' time, folks? They probably will. Well, that's the first thing to think about. What will it hold in 20 years' time? So I think DJ or someone early this morning talked about some of those key statistics. Might have been GDP, number of, percentage of the workforce, of all those sorts of things. So that was you? Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Very similar to DJ. We
almost
get mixed
the
up
same
with each other
person, really. Yeah. So I think, generally speaking, the number of farms, number of farmers, the direction it's been going will continue unless something fundamentally changes geopolitically or climatically or otherwise. So some of those fundamentals will be there. So what's that mean? Larger, more complex businesses. Someone was talking about before, who was saying about the amount of things that need to be measured, and you need an evidence base and all that sort of stuff. So larger, more complex businesses. That's all going to happen. I think the demands upon the farm base will continue to grow. So that'll have implications for that complexity and how people manage those businesses. It also have implications for all the people in the room because of that, whether they're in the service industry, banking, RDCs, and so on and so forth. So some of those things we talked about, though, I think will continue. Other things may emerge, but I think the opportunity, though, is the way in which that's approached. We talked about some of these things today. So, can we move the dial on some of the issues we talked about here, rather than, I think everyone came today saying, I came in generally with, can we move past a talk fest, and are we going to come out of today having made progress on something that we had, got us a little bit further than we were yesterday? And I think the general consensus is yes, we have. So, I'll start there anyway and let people have a say, and we'll go from there.
So what's that, 2044? Right. Well, I would probably be, if I was here and still upright, I'd be a hologram, and I would have saved myself significant travel time. I think about 2/3 of the issues we talk about in 20 years' time, in 2044, will be pretty common, and I think there'll be about 1/3 new issues. We will be absolutely concerned about how in 6 years' time we have to meet 2050 targets. We'll still be trying to work out how to do it, I think. I wonder if we'll do more listening in 20 years rather than talking. I would love for AFI, if it still exists then. Now, 2 reasons it may not exist in 20 years. One, we collapse in the next few years because there's not enough financial support, along with many other organisations in the room thinking, can we actually sustain our operations? Or it doesn't exist because it's no longer needed, because evidence-based research into policy is baked in and so well undertaken by other organisations in the industry. And so AFI was seen as, the start of something that influenced the entire industry to be different. I'm not sure that's the most likely scenario, but we'll see. So that's sort of a future vision of AFI, but I wonder again that will we listen, and will we have the same number of organisations and people in the room, or will it be dramatically smaller? And by smaller, will it make it any easier to get agreement? Not sure.
But no zombie apocalypse.
No zombie apocalypse apart from the fact that we'll just be, you'll be semi-transparent up here on stage.
Annabel.
I also wanted to pick up on the listening point and sorry Katie, I know it's your stat, but I've forgotten it in terms of the trust that the community has in agriculture. It's very high, which is not how we always feel. As an industry, we can sometimes be a bit defensive, whereas the community in general does trust us, but we also acknowledge that the community doesn't have a good understanding about what we do. So that's a huge opportunity for us. But I think it's not so much us telling our story, but being active and listening to the community about what is the information that they'd like, so that information deficit and knowledge that they have, we fill that with the information that they're asking for rather than the information that we want them to hear. And that's going to take a listening. So it's not us being heard, it's us listening to the community.
That's a really good note to finish on. I had a couple of thoughts to add, but I don't think I can do that without taking away from some of the things that you've said, because I genuinely think that agriculture is in for a tough few years. I think with the pressures coming in from what we're seeing in the way land use is going to change and resource use is going to change as we hit that crunch point for 2030 and then 2050 with targets we've already set for ourselves, which are not meaningless targets. They've been put in place for a really good reason. We've already exceeded planetary boundaries in a number of different ways. We've got to take this seriously. And that's going to be uncomfortable for ag. And I think more than ever, we need to have each other's back. But as Annabel says, listen and be ready to respond and not just say, but we do it this way, this is the way we do it, but be adaptive and be ready for the challenges that are coming for us. And that also involves being trustworthy too, as we mentioned before. Trust is important, but you need to earn that trust. You shouldn't just buy that trust or expect that trust will fall to you. You need to be able to be trustworthy in order for this to all work, which is sort of, I mean, I'd like to say that's how I designed the session later this afternoon about would I lie to you, to demonstrate whether people are trustworthy or not. That's just a nice coincidence that it's come up a lot during today, but also we will see how trustworthy Matt and Kathy and DJ are when we go out for drinks soon. But thank you very much to this panel. So a short show of appreciation. You can stay there. We don't need to move around too much. And I'm just going to finish off by thanking all of you for coming along here today, because we don't just hold these events because we think it's a nice thing to do. It's actually really hard work. We hold these because we love to hear from you. And what we hear from you informs what we do and how we think about these big policy problems. It's absolutely vital. So genuinely thank you for all of your committed attention and your passionate views on all of these different topics we've covered today. I do, of course, particularly want to thank the people who've sponsored the event today. Although some of you paid a fair bit of money to be here, it's still really expensive to put these things on. Without sponsors, these things just wouldn't happen. So our delivery partner, Rural Leadership Foundation, who's running the workshop for us tomorrow morning, our roundtable partner, Skills Insight, our platinum sponsor, WFI Insurance, drink sponsor, Map of Ag, the most popular people in the room right now, and our communications partner, Anvil Media. We sincerely thank you for your support in being able to put an event like this together and to bring all of us here. Thank you to the AFI board. Alex called out earlier and had them stand up and wave their hands, so I won't make them stand up again, but Ian McColl, Christina Hermanson, Carolyn Rhodes, Andrew Spencer, Alex Gartmann, thank you all very much for your time and energy that you give to us. And last but absolutely not least, the AFI team. Kylie Smith has done almost all of this single-handedly. She is an absolute rock star. Kylie is up the back. She hates attention, so please give her some now. Well done, Kylie. Sally Beach, Publications. Is Sally in the room or is she manning something somewhere? There's Sally, thank you very much, who puts together our beautiful publications. You saw the journal earlier, and also puts a great deal of time and energy into programs, into helping design things, and into just volunteering at the event as well. Justin Marocha, Kade Denton, our research team, and also debaters extraordinaire. Hands together for Justin and Kade. And to Bo Kilich, who looks after our finances and sends you emails saying, where is our money? That's Bo up the back in the jacket. There's a friendly face behind those reminders. Thank you all for being here today and for making this a really enjoyable event for me, and I hope successful for all of you as well. We're going to move outside now for drinks a little early. We're giving you an early mark. Hopefully the drinks are ready. And then we're going to move into our light-hearted session to finish off the day, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you tomorrow morning at Parliament House at 8:30 with your photo ID. And thanks again.